Everybody, I am back, and this is my lecture on what, as you can see here on the Prezi, it's the Intro to Sociology. What we'll be dealing with here is very fascinating, and I find it quite interesting. It's the last major module that we're going through, and it really does have a lot of really awesome things associated with it. So listen in. This isn't really a very long lecture, but my descriptions might make it a little bit longer. So just bear with me. It should be relatively eye-opening for many of you. So this is the sociology module, and we're going through the definition of sociology. Now, sociology itself really is it is a connection of anthropology, which was the earliest stuff that we studied, which talked about our evolution and our genetic makeup and so forth, stemming then carrying forward to our psychology, which was the next part, which talked about all of our interesting and very unique functions of the brain, and we did quite a bit of study on that as well. And then sociology is that next step, right? So it's our evolution, what's going on in our heads, and now how we deal with other people. And that's what society is. We are social creatures. Humans are social creatures. It's very evident in everything that we do. From the minute we're born to the minute we die, society really does play a very significant role in making us who we are. Interestingly enough, though, society can't exist without people and individuals can't exist without society. So we're very symbiotic in our needs for one another. Society needs us, and we need society. And what this is a very new science if you think about it, and you'll see that coming up in a bit. But to study society and to study us as large groups and as members of these large groups is a relatively new science. Now, when I say new science, I'm talking about the late 1700s, 1800s, so a couple hundred years, a little bit older than psychology, but in many ways very, very necessary. So here you see, and I'll post this Prezi, by the way, so if you kind of miss out on a few things, you can always go back and check the Prezi yourselves. But sociologists really are all about studying us and people, and studying people in things like gender roles and family structure and social class. And these are all things that we see all the time around us on any given day. We do see gender roles, we do see family structures, we do see social classes, we see criminal behaviors. What defines criminal? Is something illegal one year and then the next year it's perfectly legal? Case in point, in Canada, the government is looking to legalize marijuana. Well, 10 years ago, this would have been highly illegal, highly contested. Nobody would have ever thought in a million years that marijuana, an illegal drug, could ever be legal. Now suddenly we're looking at decriminalizing marijuana, and what does that mean, and how does that change? On the flip side, homosexuality was a crime, and today it's widely accepted and very open. But so what defines a crime? And this is something that sociologists look at. Social institutions, kind of carrying forward from criminal behavior. Social institutions are just that. There are these, and we'll examine these more, but for the long and short of it, there are things like government and schools and churches and all of these large carrying groups, and I guess the best way to call them, to define them, is institutions. There are these large things that basically perpetuate and carry forward the ideals and norms and values of society. Ethnicity is another big part of society, and a lot of people identify with an ethnic group and therefore create a social group out of it. And sexuality is also a very, very big part of society, and it's quite funny because, not funny, haha, but funny, almost like interesting, like, that's funny. Whereas you look at different societies and ethnicities and their views on sexuality and how they perceive sexuality is a really, really great indicator of the type of society that it is. And I'll give you an example really quickly. It struck me as very odd. I mean, I've traveled to different parts of Europe, being European myself, and I found sexuality for many European countries is not as much of a taboo as it is here in North America. And the question then becomes, well, what does that tell you about us versus them, the Europeans, and us, the North Americans? And you say to yourself, well, is it that they're just more liberal in their sense of sexuality, or is the human form not as much of a bad thing as it is here? Here it seems very pornographic, while on the other side of the Great Pond, it's far more artistic. Um, in North America, I find that sexuality is very much it's almost criminal, and that speaks to our, well, I guess not in this day and age, but as I was growing up, it was very much a thing. Like, it was nothing you really discussed out in the open. Um, but the Europeans were very, very open about it. And it always struck me as very strange how, why are we North Americans like this and Europeans are different? And you could probably find your own explanations. But one thing I came up with was that North America's foundations were really based on deeply devout religious principles. If you think about the people who founded North America, these people were religious fanatics, and as much as we may have moved forward and progressed and evolved and so forth, we still carry some of these values and ideals in our society. Whereas the Europeans are far more progressive in their views on sexuality, and it's almost like the people that they booted out of Europe, 400 years ago, were the ones that they were considering the religious fanatics, and you guys just stay over there because you're just way too fanatical for us. And they kind of progressed, and we kind of carried that fanaticism and held on to it, very puritanical, right? The Puritans, the ones with the belt buckles on their shoes and their hats, the Pilgrims. Um, and so that could theoretically explain our views on sexuality in North America versus other parts of the world. You see here, it says studying society can be very complex, and it really is. It's not just a simple answer, just like the one I gave you now. Yeah, it seems simplistic, it could seem logical, you could disagree with it, you could agree with it, but there's just so much more that goes in it. And you'll see other things like political science, which is one of my degrees, and so political science and political philosophy kind of are close to me. But then again, there's also history, which is another thing that I've studied extensively, and when you start to look at all these interdisciplinary connections within sociology, you start to see that there's just more than one answer for every question. There always seems to be one or more perspectives on why things are the way they are. There's a great book that came out a few years ago called Freakonomics, and it kind of highlighted that idea that you can't ever just assume that there's one right answer. Okay, I don't know why Prezi is just kind of weird for me, but all right. So Prezi and I aren't getting along today. So Auguste Comte was the first, let's say, the father of sociologists, or of sociology. Now, that he's not the one and only, there are others who kind of contributed to the study of sociology, but he would have been one of the first. And so he's a guy who lived, and you see here, 1798 to 1857. He was greatly influenced by the period that he was born in and grew up in. The French Revolution was a big thing. Now, the French Revolution happened in 1789, so a couple of years before he was born, but that didn't mean that just because it happened before he was born, it didn't impact him and his ideas and his beliefs. Prior to the French Revolution, again, I'm going all historical on you, in 1776, the American Revolution took place, and that significantly impacted people's ideas. And what did it really impact? Well, it turned society upside down. Up until this point in history, and we're talking about the late 1700s, early 1800s, where you see the rise of the Industrial Revolution. But prior to the revolutions, the French and the American, it was very much a system of monarchy. You had the kings, the queens, the dukes, the duchesses, the lords, the ladies, and so forth and so forth. And all of these people really were the power that defined Europe. Now, along come the revolutions that say, hey, the middle class, the bourgeoisie, as they were known. And when I say middle class, it's not the middle class we know today, but more of a wealthy middle class. So what we would consider to be, the rich people today. They basically kind of said to the monarchy, no, you guys are just carrying your titles forward, and just because you're Lord blah blah blah's son, and how come you get to be Lord? And why do you have to be, the monarchy? And why does the king get to be the king? And why can't somebody who has more money be the leader. And you saw this great shift take place with these revolutions, and the monarchies were ousted, and in came the new monarchies, I guess you can call them, because the new kings were no longer the people with the crowns, but the people with the pocketbooks, and with all the cash. And so Comte really saw this, and he saw this great transition take place all over the world. And in many ways, it impacted him because it made him really consider, what is society all about? What is it that holds society together? What is it that makes one group resent another group? What makes one group feel like they're better than another group? What makes some people decide that, you know what, I'm not going to play this game anymore and I'm going to fight? What makes other people just say, shh, just shut up and, keep your head down and just keep rolling with it? It's been going this way for years and that's how it's going to be. Um, Really, it inspired that, people to stop just accepting society for what it is and what it's always been, to now, well, but why? Why is it like this? Why are we like this? Why do we behave like this? What is it about us as a large group of people that makes us function a certain way? Um, it really, truly is fascinating if you take that perspective. And you can do it in your lives. I'm sure you do it as well all the time, all of you out there listening to me. You'll see things happen. You say, well, why do we do that? That's stupid. I don't even know why we do that. That's dumb. You know, or why don't we do that? That's dumb. Why do we continue to kind of follow this path instead of doing what makes sense? And that's good. You're kind of delving into the world of sociology, and that's what makes a sociologist, someone who asks the question, well, why do we do that? Or why don't we do that? And Comte did that, and he inspired others like Karl Marx, who was the father of communism. And it's sad that a lot of people only associate Marx with communism, because Marx really had some really fascinating ideas and theories that kind of stem beyond what we see as the political theory and the political ideal of communism. It really, he had some fascinating theories. If you ever study political science, Karl Marx will probably end up somewhere on your desk, and you'll probably end up reading some of his works. And if you look past the what modern communism is today, and look at Marx, I'm sure if Marx were alive today, he would look at communism and it would be like a double face palm, where he'd be like, no, 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 that's not what I meant. You guys did it wrong. Marx, he did turn that magnifying glass onto society, and he did in many ways look and say, well, why are we doing this? Why are we continuing to perpetuate this stuff? And this all came because of Auguste Comte, who came along and said, that's what it is. And so he felt, and you see here, he felt that sociology could be used to inspire social reforms and make things better. Because how else can you kind of change things if you don't examine them? I am moving on to the next slide. Yeah, anytime. Come on, moving on. Moving. Next slide. Go. I'll be right back. Okay, well, technical difficulties have been somewhat resolved. I finally moved on to the next slide, and I'm going to talk to you about the sociological schools of thought, because hey, just because somebody came up with this concept of sociology doesn't mean that other people say, yeah, but why can't we see things like this? Very much like psychology, where you had Sigmund Freud come along and say this, and people went, okay, cool, but good ideas, like them, you're doing a pretty good job there, Sigmund, but you know what, we're going to change things up a bit because we don't agree with everything you say. Well, same thing with sociology. A lot of people, took the ideas put forth and then went, okay, what about a different perspective? And so what I've done here and what I've created here or taken here is a different set of, and you'll see the chart in a minute, and it says the chart below, but you'll see the chart in the Prezi, it kind of talks about the different schools of thought, and I'll go through each of them and I'll give you explanations. I really would encourage you, if you're not 100% sure, to go through and do a little bit of research on your own because my explanations may not be may not make the most sense to you, but if you kind of go out and kind of look them up, you may find a different perspective or a different explanation that makes more sense to help you understand what each of them are. But here they are. I'll give them to you. The first one is called structural functionalism. Now, a guy by the name of Emil Durkheim was one of the guys who basically was one of the fathers of sociology, and he kind of came up with this idea of structural functionalism. And what that comes down to is, and you see over on this side here, it's the study of how social structures function to serve the needs of society. Whoa, that was totally unexpected. Don't know what happened there, but yeah. Okay, so just stand by again for technical difficulty. Oh, whoa. That. Okay, I'm going to try hitting the arrow forward again, and please work. Prezi. Okay, I'm going to pause it again and see if I can resolve the technical difficulties. So just hang with, just hang tight, which of course for you is nothing. Okay, so again, sorry, I'm back. For you it was literally a second, but for me it was a couple minutes. But here I am back again, so I'm talking about Durkheim and structural functionalism. Now, okay, so structural functionalism is just that. It studies how social structures serve the needs of society. What does that really mean? Well, it means a couple of things. First of all, you can't have a society without certain social structures, things like family, things like education, things like religion. All of these things serve a purpose. Government, these are all things that kind of help to define how a group of people define themselves. And it also helps to, okay, whoa, no, I just lost it again. All right, I'm pausing it again. Whoa, hold on. And I'm back again. So I kind of lost track of where I was. Oh yeah, things like government, schools, and stuff for the religion. Okay, so just on a side note, you can see how much time was passed when I'm like, okay, what was I just talking about? Yeah. So even in like the few seconds that I'm pausing, and you don't see it, but for me it's taking quite a bit of time because I'm going back and trying to get this all set up again, and it keeps jumping around on me. Anyway, this has taken an incredibly long amount of time. Okay, so here it is. Structural functionalism is Durkheim's way of saying that society needs these institutions, these social structures, and the social structures obviously need people to keep them running. Karl Marx, the next one here that you'll see that I'm kind of pointing to, is conflict theory. Now, what's really fascinating about Marx, and I was talking to him, I was talking about him a little bit earlier, and the one thing that he talked about was the idea of conflict. And the concept that Marx came up with was the idea that no change happens without some kind of conflict. And so here he says that how power forms the basis of relationships between different groups and creates social conflict. And so he believed that each group always, and there are different groups in society, and you can classify them any way you want. But the long and the short of it is that the power struggle between these groups is what he called conflict. It wasn't always armed conflict. It didn't involve guns and pitchforks and torches and other things like that. It never really involved a state of war per se. But conflicts between groups and conflicting ideas and ideals are often what cause changes. And if you look at our society today and say to yourself, a lot of the great changes that we're seeing in our society are a result of groups who basically didn't agree. And so one group kind of called out another group and kind of said, you know what, it's not fair that, for example, in the last century when it was kind of like, well, black people are considered second-class citizens in the United States because, they came from slaves. And though the rest of the world is doing the double facepalm, the Americans are perfectly okay with it, right? And so conflict had to arise. Great names like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King kind of brought about this conflict, and they rallied the people around them, and we start to see a shift in how society treats different groups and how they view different groups, and eventually you start to see shifts and changes in social understandings and beliefs, and that's a big part of conflict theory. And so Karl Marx proposed that, and he said that without that kind of conflict, you will never truly see a change. And change usually, in Karl Marx's mind anyway, often led to the better. Which brings me to the next one, feminist sociology, and one of the big proponents there is Dorothy Smith, you see here. And, interestingly enough, a woman would be the one to kind of bring about feminist sociology. And I've said this before, and I'm going to say this again. When you hear the word feminist, try to get that idea of, women are awesome and men suck kind of an idea, because it's not what feminist theory is about. In fact, it's all about, and I'll say this again, women and feminism is a perspective. And so the idea that examining everything from a gender perspective is far more beneficial than simply just looking at it from a male perspective. And if you consider throughout history, most everything has been looked at through a male perspective, it would almost stand to reason that somebody would come along and say, hey, what about the women's perspective in all this? And of course, coming back to the conflict idea where men said, no, women, whatever. And then eventually, people kind of changed their mind. There wasn't really any conflict per se. There was no war between men and women, but rather just the constant push of the feminists to kind of say, yeah, but what about the women's perspective? What about the women's perspective? And finally, it was kind of shifted to stop being just a male perspective and being a feminist perspective as well. And that really is a good thing. If you've seen the movie Hidden Figures, I believe, which talked about the idea of all these mathematicians in NASA, it really does quite nicely highlight a lot of the stuff that I was talking about, structural functionalism, where you see the notion that social structures really kind of were very clear, very defined, and very defined in such a way that almost to us now, looking back on it, it seems very oppressive. But that also brings about the idea of conflict, right, where certain groups feel slighted or feel like they're being considered less citizens, and therefore in many ways they caused a change. And it wasn't really conflict per se, there wasn't a war, but you start to see a shift, right? Somebody pushing back against, and that's what conflict is. It's pushing against the norms and values that are accepted as normal. And that also brings in the idea of feminism, right? Where the idea of a woman can do just as well as a man, but the feminist perspective was never truly considered. The last one is symbolic interactionism. You see that's the one that I have here. And guys like George Herbert Mead and Charles Cooley and Max Weber, they're the ones who kind of came up with this idea of how does society create itself? And that's another really fascinating idea of looking at things. And so how does society create itself? How does society become what it is? We just accept that somebody caused it, but it's not. It really is an individual and a group of individuals who accept something, and suddenly the wider society or the greater society kind of carries it on. Perfect, really awesome examples are, you just have to look no further than your phones and look at technology. And we're going to examine digital sociology, by the way, because it's a new thing. But look at things like Facebook. A long time ago, Facebook just wasn't a thing. It just took a group of individuals. It took one individual, but then it took a bunch of individuals to look at it and go, yeah, this is a thing. We're going to use this. And we're going to use this in this kind of a way. Now, what Mark Zuckerberg did, I think that's his name, he came up with this platform. But for him, I don't think he ever truly envisioned what the platform was going to turn into. That's really the symbolic interactionist perspective, where individuals kind of took Facebook and made it what it is today. Look at things like Instagram. Instagram was just a platform. Instagram is nothing more than picture sharing, and that's it, with some filters. But what individuals have done is they've transformed Instagram into a social thing. Look at Twitter, the same thing with Twitter, whereas Twitter is nothing more than just a place where people can put their ideas out in very, very large ways to a large audience. But again, the creation of Twitter isn't what caused the change. What caused the change was the symbolic interactionist approach, or the individuals who basically took these mediums and changed the wider society with them. And so how do people create their world through social interactions? Well, I just gave you 3 examples where it's not just a matter of the technology, but what are you going to do with it, and that's what determines our behavior, or what has shifted our behavior. And symbolic interactionists will say that, once upon a time somebody decided to, you know, hit a little white ball with a stick and, try to put it into a hole down a very long stretch of grass. Um, that was one person doing it. It would take there was an individual, who invented golf, but it took a whole bunch of people to transform golf from that one person who's just trying to put a little stone into a hole to this massive business and industry, and TV channels, and clothing lines, and shoes, and golf clubs, and memberships, and an elitist, and a trophy, and a league, and so forth and so forth. The greater society, it's dependent on individuals who have to come about and change things and say, yeah, we're going to do this. And it takes a whole bunch of other individuals to go, yeah, that's a good idea, let's do that. And it takes a whole bunch of other individuals to look at the other people who just did it and went, hey, what are they doing over there? I think I want to try that too. And it's not even a matter of inventing things or innovating, or using Instagram, or using Twitter, or using Facebook, or playing golf. Sometimes it takes a couple of individuals to go, that's not fair what they're doing to those people. We should change that. And so they rally, and then other people look at it, well, what are they rallying about? Oh, they're rallying about that. I agree with that. And suddenly things change again. So symbolic interactionism takes these small individual interactions that people have, and eventually you see how they snowball into these bigger, larger, massive social shifts. On the flip side, going from the very large social shifts to the smaller ones, well, now how society has embraced things like the internet, how it's embraced things like Facebook, how it's embraced things like Twitter and Instagram, how it's embraced things like golf, those things then shape us as individuals. They shape me, they shape you, they shape your parents, they shape your siblings, they shape all of us. And how we interact with each other is shifted and shaped because of how society has chosen to shift and shape. And so, what are the questions that we would be asking? Well, structural functionalists will say, so what is this institution? What's this thing doing to make things better? How do social structures serve the needs of society and individuals? On the second one, a question that you would ask is for conflict theory is, how is conflict causing a change, or what conflicts are causing change, or what could happen because of the conflicts that are happening here? The feminists would ask questions like, well, how's that going to affect women? And it's not so much how's that going to affect women, like, having, I don't know, the pink pen, for example, with pink ink. It really is a thing, by the way. You can look it up. It's not a joke. But the idea of using pink as an ink instead of blue, because why do we use blue ink? Feminists will say, well, why does all ink have to be blue? Blue is a male color, and it's kind of oppressive to women. Women shouldn't be allowed to use blue ink. They should be able to choose whatever ink they want to choose. And it's how is this impacting women? And that's what a feminist would ask. The symbolic interactionist, I think I went on and on about it, but it's all about, like, how do individuals impact society, and how does society impact individuals? I hope that was clear. I think I talked too much on that one. Okay, I'm trying to move on to the next slide, which it's thinking, it's moving ever so slowly. We're getting there. Come on. So that brings us to our last slide. I'm going to post this Prezi. I sincerely hope it works much better for you than it has for me. But here it is. Here's your assignment. And this week is, because it's a short week, I'm going to keep this assignment relatively simple. And I'm going to ask you to select one of the videos below. And let's see if I can zoom in here without it. Okay, anyway, the first one here is called Generation Jobless. The second one is called Are We Digital Dummies? The third one is called Facebook Follies, and the last one is called Pink Ribbons Inc. This one, and this one are all on Facebook. This one is a link, and I think now it's available on Netflix, but you really should kind of pick and choose one of them. Anyway, what I'm going to ask you to do is to select one of the videos. Pick one. You don't have to pick all of them. You don't have to watch all of them. If you'd like to, you can, but pick one. Then basically watch it, and then take each of the four schools of thought: the symbolic interactionist, the feminist, the conflict, and the structural functionalist, and then basically ask yourself or assume the role of each of those theorists, those theoretical perspectives, and apply those questions to the video. So if you're going to go to, I'm going to go to Pink Ribbons Inc., for example. And so Pink Ribbons Inc. is all about the idea of the business of cancer. And it's a really fascinating documentary because, many of us have been in some way, shape, or form impacted by cancer. And I don't know if there's any one person in the world who is in some way, shape, or form hasn't been affected by cancer. But what Pink Ribbons Inc. does is it kind of turns the lens on something that we've accepted as just being a thing. And that thing is that we raise money for cancer. And then Pink Ribbons Inc. asked the question, why are we doing that? Why do we do that? What is this run for the cure? Like, why do you run? What is your running? What is the speed of you moving on two legs doing to stop a disease that has devastated millions? And so, and now that I even questioned that, you kind of like, yeah, that's a good point. What does it mean to wear a pink ribbon? Yeah, I'm wearing a pink ribbon. I'm fighting against cancer. Well, no, you're not. You're wearing a pink ribbon. And so then ask the question. So then take the four perspectives. So then you look at a structural functionalist and say, okay, well, what is structural functionalism again? It's all about the institutions. No, wait, which one was that one? No, that was conflict. No, conflict was, I can't remember. So you're going to go back and you're going to go through and you're going to ask these questions from different perspectives, and you're going to have to go back and reread them, and that's the point of all this. I'm not giving this to you. You're going to have to go and really try to come up with this one on your own and truly try to understand it and say to yourself, from each of those four schools of thought, what is this documentary telling me? And what are each of the groups, when they were watching this, saying? The conflict people would say, it's about time people started to really ask questions about, cancer and cancer research. And if they're raising all this money, what the hell have they done? They've raised bazillions of dollars. Every year they're doing this. So where does the money go? I've never seen anybody with a lab coat come up and take this giant check and say, hey, thanks. We were short a few bucks, but now research can continue, right? We always just assume that it's happening. Same thing with, are we digital dummies or Facebook follies? Facebook is a thing. Facebook has become a big thing, so much so that when you go to apply for a job, your potential employers will start to look up your Facebook profile, and God help you if you've posted things, and what's, there used to be this commercial on TV, this what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. No, not anymore. Right now, what happens in Vegas goes all over Facebook. Or whatever goes on Facebook stays on Facebook, and anyone at any time can go up and find it. And you're like, yeah, but I was young and stupid then. I'm a different person now. Like, yeah, cool. But somebody in there, you, at some point posted a whole bunch of this stuff. It could be angry, it could be hurtful, it could be whatever. That paints a picture of who you are, especially to someone who doesn't know you. And so these are things that, as a society, we really have to stop and look at. Should you be allowed to post things on Facebook? Should there be a Facebook police out there? Should you be allowed to say whatever you want on Twitter? Should you be allowed to post whatever pictures on Instagram? You're like, well, I have the freedom to do that. You're like, you sure do. Absolutely. This is a free society, and you can do that. But what are the long-term implications of your behaviors today? So anyway, watch the videos, and this was for my in-class group. So you take the four schools of thought and apply them to each, apply each question to your video and answer the question, obviously. And we're looking at about each question should have about a 4 to 5 sentence response. So Basically, each question takes about a paragraph to answer. So when all said and done, you should have 4 paragraphs. So in the beginning, basically highlight or outline which video you chose, list your 4 questions from each of the schools of thought, and then answer the 4 questions. And that's pretty much it for this week for your intro to sociology. It's pretty much skimming the surface, and it's kind of like a nice little way to kind of get yourselves familiar with what sociology is all about. I do encourage you to kind of go through and start to really make sense of each of the schools of thought for yourself. Have a really good understanding of what they are. Don't take my explanations because they make sense to me, but they may not make sense to you. And so try to understand them before you watch the video. If you have any questions, send me an email or send me a message.